The emergency radio crackled to life at 4:47 p.m. Its static-filled transmission cutting through the peaceful silence of Pine Ridge National Forest like a knife through silk. Somewhere in the vast wilderness of Oregon's Cascade Mountains, a 68-year-old woman had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only her walking stick and a single muddy footprint beside Whispering Pines Trail. The temperature was dropping fast. Storm clouds were gathering overhead, and darkness would fall within 3 hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Mitchell had always been the kind of woman who walked to the beat of her own drum, much to her daughter's frustration. At 68, she possessed an adventurous spirit that refused to acknowledge the limitations that age was supposed to impose. This particular Tuesday afternoon, she had driven herself to Pine Ridge for what she called a gentle nature walk, despite her daughter Sarah's repeated warnings about hiking alone. Eleanor had laughed off the concerns with her characteristic wave of dismissal, insisting that a woman who had raised 3 children and survived 40 years of marriage could certainly handle a well-marked forest trail. But the forest had other plans. Somewhere between the visitor center and the scenic overlook that Eleanor had marked on her map, the carefully maintained path had become a maze of fallen logs, overgrown brush, and confusing deer trails that led deeper into the wilderness. What started as a simple wrong turn had spiraled into something far more serious as Eleanor found herself surrounded by towering Douglas firs that all looked identical, with no familiar landmarks in sight. David Chun was reviewing maintenance reports at the Pine Ridge Ranger Station when the call came through dispatch. As the lead search and rescue coordinator for the district, he had responded to hundreds of missing person cases over his 8-year career with the Forest Service. Most involved inexperienced hikers who had wandered off marked trails, college students who had overestimated their outdoor skills, or elderly visitors who had become disoriented on familiar paths. The vast majority of these cases ended within a few hours with relieved families and minor scrapes or bruises. Something about this particular call felt different from the moment David heard the details. Eleanor Mitchell wasn't some reckless thrill-seeker or unprepared tourist. According to the initial report, she was an experienced walker who had visited Pine Ridge dozens of times over the past decade. Her car had been found properly parked at the designated trailhead, her emergency contact information clearly displayed on the dashboard, and her hiking gear suggested someone who understood basic outdoor safety protocols. The timing was what worried David most. Afternoon thunderstorms were common in the Cascades during late spring, and the Weather Service had issued warnings about rapidly changing conditions throughout the region. If Eleanor had become lost or injured, she would be facing a dangerous night in the wilderness, with temperatures potentially dropping into the low 40s and heavy rain expected after midnight. David's radio buzzed with updates from the initial search team that had been dispatched to canvass the immediate area around Whispering Pines Trail. They had located Eleanor's walking stick approximately half a mile from the main path, abandoned, beside a creek crossing where the trail markers became less distinct. A single muddy footprint near the water's edge suggested she had attempted to cross the stream, but the rocky terrain on the opposite bank showed no additional tracks. The discovery sent a chill down David's spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. He knew this particular section of forest intimately, having spent countless hours mapping every ridge, ravine, and game trail within a 20-mile radius of the ranger station. The area beyond that creek crossing was a labyrinth of steep terrain, dense underbrush, and seasonal streams that could disorient even experienced hikers. If Eleanor had crossed the water and continued deeper into the backcountry, finding her would require a coordinated effort involving multiple search teams and possibly helicopter support. As David gathered his emergency gear and prepared to join The search, his 11-year-old daughter Emma appeared in the doorway of the ranger station. She had walked over from Mountain View Elementary after school, as she did every Tuesday when her after-school art program was canceled. Emma's dark hair was still damp from the light rain that had begun falling, and her backpack was stuffed with the nature sketches she created during her free time. "Dad, why are all the trucks heading out with their lights on?" Emma asked her artist's eye immediately noticing the unusual activity around the station. David knelt down to her level, choosing his words carefully. His daughter had already experienced enough uncertainty in her young life, having lost her mother in a research expedition accident 3 years earlier. He made it a point never to lie to Emma about the realities of his work, but he also tried to avoid causing unnecessary worry. "There's a grandmother who got lost on the trails today," David explained gently. "We're going to help find her and bring her home safely." Emma nodded with the serious expression she wore whenever her father's work took on emergency urgency. She had grown up around the ranger station and understood that sometimes people needed help in the forest. "Like when you found those campers last month?" she asked, referring to a family that had become stranded when their car broke down on a remote access road. David smiled and ruffled her hair. "Exactly like that. Mrs. Foster is coming to stay with you tonight, and I'll be back as soon as we locate our missing hiker." What David didn't tell his daughter was that this case already felt more complicated than a simple trail rescue. Eleanor Mitchell wasn't just any lost hiker. According to the information provided by local law enforcement, she was the mother of Sarah Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Tech Solutions, one of Portland's most successful software development companies. The family had significant resources and connections, which meant this search would likely attract media attention and pressure from higher authorities to produce quick results. More concerning was the weather forecast. The light rain that had begun during the afternoon was expected to intensify into a significant storm system moving in from the Pacific coast. Heavy precipitation would wash away any remaining tracks, make helicopter searches impossible, and create dangerous conditions for both the missing person and the search teams. If they didn't locate Eleanor Mitchell within the next few hours, what started as a routine missing person case could quickly escalate into a life-threatening emergency that would test every skill David had developed during his years in search and rescue operations. David's transformation from ordinary forest ranger to emergency response leader happened within minutes of receiving the updated weather reports. He methodically gathered his specialized gear, each piece selected based on years of experience, navigating the unpredictable terrain of the Cascade Mountains. His headlamp, GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency shelter, and high-calorie provisions were packed with the precision of someone who understood that preparation could mean the difference between life and death in wilderness emergencies. The drive to the search area took David through the heart of Cascade Valley, past the coffee shops and local businesses that formed the economic backbone of this small mountain community. The contrast between the peaceful town and the urgent mission ahead wasn't lost on him. While residents were finishing their workday routines, gathering for dinner, or helping children with homework, somewhere in the vast wilderness beyond the town limits, an elderly woman was facing her first night, alone in the forest. David's radio buzzed with coordinated reports from the expanding search operation. The initial ground team had established a command post at the creek crossing where Eleanor's walking stick had been discovered. They had identified several possible routes she might have taken after crossing the water, but the rocky terrain made tracking nearly impossible. Each potential path led into increasingly challenging backcountry where navigation became exponentially more difficult. Park Supervisor Tom Bradley met David at the trailhead, his weathered face reflecting the gravity of the situation. Tom had overseen Pine Ridge operations for over 15 years and had seen enough search and rescue missions to recognize when circumstances were aligning against them. The approaching storm, the challenging terrain, and the fact that Eleanor had already Been missing for over 3 hours created a perfect storm of complications. Weather Service updated their forecast. Tom reported grimly. Storms moving in faster than expected. We've got maybe 90 minutes of decent search conditions before visibility goes to hell and the rain makes everything dangerous. David nodded, processing the information while mentally calculating search patterns and resource allocation. 90 minutes wasn't much time to cover the vast area where Eleanor might have wandered. The initial search strategy divided the potential search area into grid sections, with 2-person teams assigned to specific zones based on the most likely routes Eleanor might have taken. David chose to lead the team investigating the most challenging sector, a steep ravine system that extended deep into the backcountry. It was the least likely route for an elderly hiker to attempt, but David's experience had taught him that people often made unexpected decisions when they became disoriented in unfamiliar terrain. As David and his partner began their systematic search of the ravine, he couldn't help but think about the parallels between this situation and the expedition that had claimed his wife Maria 3 years earlier. She had been a respected wildlife biologist conducting research in the remote mountains of Alaska when an unexpected weather system had trapped her team in dangerous conditions. Despite extensive search efforts, Maria and 2 colleagues had never been found. The memory of that loss drove David's meticulous attention to detail during search operations. He understood intimately how quickly conditions could deteriorate in wilderness environments, how a simple navigation error could become a fatal mistake, and how families waited desperately for news that might never come. Every missing person case became personal for David, carrying echoes of his own unresolved grief and determination to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. The ravine system proved to be even more treacherous than David had anticipated. Loose rocks shifted underfoot, creating potential ankle-twisting hazards with every step. Dense vegetation obscured sight lines and made it impossible to call out effectively to someone who might be injured or unconscious nearby. The growing darkness and increasing wind made audio detection nearly impossible, forcing the search teams to rely primarily on visual confirmation. 2 hours into the search, David's radio crackled with an update that sent his heart racing. One of the teams investigating the eastern ridge had discovered fresh fabric caught on a thorn bush approximately 2 miles from the original trail. The fabric appeared to match the description of Eleanor's hiking jacket, and the location suggested she had somehow managed to travel much farther into the backcountry than anyone had initially thought possible. The discovery shifted the entire search operation into a new phase of urgency. If Eleanor had reached the eastern ridge, she was now in terrain that even experienced hikers found challenging during daylight hours. The approaching storm would make that area extremely dangerous with steep drops, unstable footing, and limited shelter options. David immediately redirected his team toward the new search zone, pushing through increasingly difficult terrain as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. David's specialized knowledge of the Pine Ridge ecosystem became crucial as the search moved into more remote areas. Unlike the other rangers who had learned the forest through maps and routine patrols, David had spent years studying every microhabitat, seasonal migration pattern, and geological feature within the park boundaries. His background as a wildlife biologist, combined with his intimate familiarity with animal behavior, gave him insights into how people might move through wilderness areas when they became lost and disoriented. The eastern ridge where Eleanor's fabric had been found was part of a complex watershed system that David had mapped extensively during his first years at Pine Ridge. He knew that the ridgeline contained several natural shelter areas where an experienced hiker might seek protection from weather. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He also knew that the same terrain features that provided shelter could become deadly traps if someone became injured or unable to navigate in darkness. As David's headlamp cut through the growing darkness, illuminating patches of wet vegetation and slippery rock faces, he found himself drawing on skills he hadn't used since his National Geographic days. Reading terrain in low-light conditions, interpreting subtle signs of human passage, and maintaining precise navigation while moving quickly through unfamiliar territory were all abilities he had developed during years of tracking wildlife in remote locations around the world. The irony of his current situation wasn't lost on David. He had once traveled to exotic locations around the globe, documenting rare species and conducting groundbreaking research that appeared in prestigious scientific journals. His work had taken him to rainforests, mountain ranges, and wilderness areas that most people would never see. Yet here he was, using those same skills to search for a lost grandmother in the forests of his own backyard. The rain intensified as David's team moved deeper into the eastern ridge system, transforming from a light drizzle into the kind of steady precipitation that could quickly soak through even the best outdoor gear. Visibility dropped to mere yards, forcing the searchers to move more slowly and carefully to avoid their own accidents. Radio communication became intermittent as the storm interfered with signals, and the terrain created dead zones where transmission was impossible. David made the difficult decision to continue the search despite the deteriorating conditions. His experience told him that Eleanor's chances of surviving a full night in the storm were declining with each passing hour. Hypothermia became a serious concern once temperatures dropped and wet conditions prevented effective body heat retention. An elderly person who might already be dealing with fatigue, dehydration, or minor injuries would be particularly vulnerable to the life-threatening effects of prolonged exposure. The search had transformed from a routine missing person case into something far more complex and urgent. David found himself drawing on every skill, instinct, and piece of knowledge he had accumulated during his diverse career. The quiet ranger who had been content to live a simple life focused on his daughter's needs was being called to step up in ways he hadn't anticipated since leaving his high-profile research career behind. 45 miles away in downtown Portland, Sarah Mitchell's meticulously orchestrated world was collapsing with the precision of a controlled demolition. The phone call from Pine Ridge had reached her during the most important board meeting of the quarter, where she was presenting the strategic roadmap that would determine Mitchell Tech Solutions' expansion into sustainable energy markets across the Pacific Northwest. Her assistant Lisa had burst into the conference room with unprecedented urgency, something that simply never happened in Sarah's carefully managed professional environment. The boardroom had fallen silent as Sarah took the call, her composed expression gradually shifting from mild annoyance to obvious alarm. The 12 executives seated around the polished mahogany table watched their CEO transform from the confident leader they knew into a daughter facing every adult child's worst nightmare. Her mother, the woman who had raised her to be fiercely independent and professionally unstoppable, was missing somewhere in the wilderness during a dangerous storm. Sarah's first instinct was to apply the same systematic problem-solving approach that had built her company from a struggling startup into an industry leader, generating $47 million in annual revenue. She immediately began making calls to coordinate resources, contact emergency services, and arrange for private search assistance if necessary. Her phone buzzed with efficiency as she dispatched her executive assistant to research helicopter rental companies, contacted her legal team about liability issues, and began calculating the financial resources that could be mobilized for the search effort. The irony of the situation struck Sarah as she raced through the corridors of her modern office building toward the parking garage. She had spent years building a company that specialized in creating smart technology solutions for complex environmental challenges. Mitchell Tech software helped utility companies optimize renewable energy distribution, assisted municipalities in managing sustainable transportation systems, and provided data analytics for conservation organizations. Yet when faced with her own environmental emergency, all of her technological expertise felt utterly useless. Sarah's relationship with her mother had always been complicated by their fundamentally different approaches to life and risk management. Eleanor Mitchell embodied the kind of spontaneous, adventurous spirit that made Sarah deeply uncomfortable. While Sarah scheduled every aspect of her existence weeks in advance, Eleanor prided herself on embracing unexpected opportunities and following whatever path seemed interesting on any given day. While Sarah built her security through careful planning and professional achievement, Eleanor found her joy in experiences, relationships, and the kind of unstructured exploration that Sarah considered reckless. The drive from Portland to Pine Ridge National Forest normally took Sarah exactly 43 minutes when she made her monthly duty visits to check on her mother's well-being. Tonight, with storm winds buffeting her luxury sedan and rain reducing visibility to dangerous levels, the journey became a white-knuckle test of her determination to reach the search area as quickly as possible. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel with the same intensity she brought to hostile corporate negotiations. But the mountain highways demanded a different kind of control than she was accustomed to exercising. As Sarah navigated the winding roads leading into Cascade Valley, she found herself thinking about the conversations she had avoided having with her mother for the past several years. Eleanor had been dropping increasingly obvious hints about her desire to move closer to Sarah's life in Portland, perhaps finding a smaller place in the city where they could see each other more frequently. Sarah had systematically deflected these suggestions, citing her demanding work schedule and her mother's obvious happiness in the mountain community she had called home for over a decade. The truth was more complicated and uncomfortable. Sarah had deliberately maintained distance from her mother because Eleanor's lifestyle represented everything that Sarah had rejected in her pursuit of professional success. Eleanor's comfortable embrace of uncertainty, her willingness to take physical risks for the sake of experience, and her prioritization of personal fulfillment over financial security challenged the fundamental assumptions that Sarah had built her identity around. Sarah's phone rang continuously during the drive, calls from worried employees, board members seeking updates, and family friends who had heard about the emergency through the small-town communication network that connected Cascade Valley residents. Each conversation forced Sarah to confront how little she actually knew about her mother's daily routines, her hiking habits, or the extent of her outdoor experience. Sarah realized with growing discomfort that she had been so focused on managing her own carefully controlled existence that she had become disconnected from the realities of her mother's life. The Pine Ridge Ranger Station appeared through the storm like a beacon of purposeful activity. Emergency vehicles lined the parking area, their flashing lights creating a kaleidoscope of red and blue reflections on the wet pavement. Sarah could see uniformed rangers moving with organized urgency, coordinating equipment and updating search protocols based on rapidly changing conditions. The sight of so many professionals mobilized to find her mother filled Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and escalating anxiety about what their level of concern might indicate. Inside the ranger station, Sarah encountered a controlled chaos that felt simultaneously familiar and alien to her corporate sensibilities. Radio communications crackled with updates from search teams, weather reports updated constantly on multiple screens, and topographical maps covered every available surface, marked with colored pins indicating search zones and discovered evidence. The operation had a professional efficiency that Sarah recognized, but it was focused on variables that existed completely outside her area of expertise. Park Supervisor Tom Bradley approached Sarah with the weathered confidence of someone who had managed countless emergency situations over his long career. His explanation of the search effort was thorough and honest, outlining both the resources being deployed and the challenges posed by the terrain and weather conditions. Sarah appreciated his directness, even as the information confirmed her worst fears about the seriousness of her mother's situation. Your mother appears to have traveled much farther into the backcountry than we initially expected, Tom explained, pointing to marks on the detailed topographical map. We found fabric from her jacket here, about 2 miles from the main trail system. That puts her in some very challenging terrain, especially with this storm moving through. Our lead search coordinator is investigating that area right now, but the conditions are making everything more difficult. Sarah studied the map with the same analytical focus she brought to market research and competitive analysis, trying to understand the geographical challenges that were complicating the search effort. The elevation changes, stream crossings, and dense forest coverage that made Pine Ridge a beautiful recreational destination also created countless places where someone could become lost, injured, or trapped by weather conditions. Who is your lead search coordinator? Sarah asked, already formulating plans to provide additional resources or expertise if necessary. Her instinct was to identify the key decision maker and determine what support might accelerate the search process. Tom's response surprised her, with its tone of obvious respect and confidence. David Chun, our senior ranger and search rescue specialist. He's got more experience in these mountains than anyone else on our team, and he's currently leading the investigation of the most likely area where your mother might have taken shelter. Tom paused, studying Sarah's expression. David's the kind of person you want heading up this operation. He won't give up, and he knows this forest better than almost anyone alive. The name meant nothing to Sarah but the supervisor's confidence. In this, David Chun provided some reassurance that competent leadership was directing the search effort. Sarah had built her career on identifying and working with highly skilled professionals, and she recognized the tone of genuine respect in Tom's voice when he spoke about the search coordinator. "What can I do to help?" Sarah asked her executive, instincts immediately seeking ways to contribute resources or expertise to the operation. "I can arrange for additional equipment, helicopter support, or whatever might be useful." Tom appreciated her willingness to help, but explained that the storm conditions had grounded aircraft and that the search teams were already equipped with the best available technology for the terrain and weather they were facing. Right now, the most important thing is letting our people do what they're trained for, Tom advised. David and his team know these mountains. They know how to search effectively in difficult conditions, and they're not going to stop until we find your mother. The words were meant to be reassuring, but they also highlighted Sarah's complete powerlessness in a situation where her usual problem-solving tools were irrelevant. As Sarah settled into an uncomfortable chair in the ranger station's waiting area, surrounded by the ongoing coordination of the search effort, she found herself confronting emotions and fears that her structured lifestyle had been designed to avoid. The possibility of losing her mother before they had resolved their complicated relationship, the realization of how much distance she had allowed to develop between them, and the uncomfortable recognition that her mother's adventurous spirit might have led her into genuine danger, all combined to create a level of anxiety that Sarah hadn't experienced since her father's death 15 years earlier. Meanwhile, deep in the forest's eastern ridge system, David Chun was methodically working through terrain that would challenge even experienced mountaineers under optimal conditions. The fabric discovery had provided a crucial breakthrough in determining Eleanor's general location, but it had also confirmed David's worst fears about the complexity of the search area. The ridge system where Eleanor appeared to be traveling consisted of interconnected ravines, steep rock faces, and dense vegetation that created countless opportunities for someone to become completely disoriented. David's headlamp cut through the darkness and driving rain as he carefully examined every potential shelter location along the ridgeline. His years of wildlife research had taught him to think like the subjects he was tracking, understanding their likely behavior patterns under stress and their instinctive responses to environmental challenges. An elderly hiker facing her first night alone in the wilderness would be seeking 3 fundamental requirements: shelter from the weather, a source of fresh water, and terrain that felt secure rather than threatening. The geology of the eastern ridge provided several natural formations that could offer protection from wind and rain. David systematically investigated each possibility, calling out Eleanor's name and listening carefully for any response that might indicate her location. The sound of his voice was quickly swallowed by the storm, but David knew that even if Eleanor couldn't respond loudly, she might be able to make smaller sounds that could guide him to her location if he was close enough. David's radio crackled intermittently with updates from other search teams, working different sections of the expanded search area. The fabric discovery had prompted a complete reorganization of the search effort, with additional personnel called in from neighboring ranger districts and volunteer search and rescue groups, activated to provide supplementary coverage. The coordination required to manage multiple teams across difficult terrain during dangerous weather conditions tested every aspect of the emergency response system. As David navigated a particularly treacherous section of loose shale and exposed rock faces, he found himself thinking about his own relationship with risk and responsibility. 3 years earlier, he had been leading research expeditions in some of the world's most remote and dangerous locations. His work with National Geographic had taken him to places where environmental hazards, unpredictable weather, and navigation challenges were constant concerns. He had been comfortable making decisions that affected the safety of entire research teams, calculating acceptable risk levels, and developing contingency plans for worst-case scenarios. The tragedy that claimed his wife Maria had fundamentally changed David's relationship with risk assessment and leadership responsibility. The investigation had determined that the flash flood in Alaska was an unforeseeable natural disaster that no amount of preparation could have prevented. Weather forecasts had been favorable, safety protocols had been followed meticulously, and the research team had been operating well within established guidelines for remote fieldwork. Yet Maria and 2 colleagues had died when conditions changed faster than anyone could have anticipated. The guilt and second-guessing that followed Maria's death had driven David away from the high-stakes world of expedition leadership to the relative safety and predictability of forest ranger duties. He had deliberately chosen a career path that allowed him to help people while minimizing the kinds of life or death decisions that had haunted him since the Alaska expedition. Working as a ranger in Pine Ridge had felt like a way to use his outdoor skills and scientific knowledge, while avoiding the psychological burden of being responsible for other people's survival in extreme conditions. Tonight's search was forcing David to confront the reality that he couldn't completely escape responsibility or risk, even in his carefully chosen refuge. Eleanor Mitchell's life might depend on decisions he made during the next few hours. The weather conditions, terrain challenges, and time pressures were creating exactly the kind of high-stakes situation that David had hoped to avoid by leaving expedition work behind. Yet his experience and specialized knowledge made him the person best qualified to lead this particular search effort. David's systematic approach to the Eastern Ridge search reflected both his scientific training and his hard-earned understanding of how quickly conditions could deteriorate in wilderness environments. He moved through the terrain with deliberate precision, documenting his route to avoid retracing ground unnecessarily, maintaining constant communication with the command post when radio conditions allowed, and carefully managing his own energy and resources to sustain the search effort throughout the night if necessary. The discovery of Eleanor's second piece of evidence came just after midnight, when David's flashlight beam caught a reflection from something metallic wedged between 2 boulders near a seasonal creek crossing. Eleanor's water bottle, still half full, had apparently been dropped or abandoned at a location that suggested she had been following the stream bed in an attempt to navigate through the confusing terrain. The bottle's position indicated that Eleanor had been moving deeper into the backcountry rather than attempting to return toward the main trail system. David immediately radioed the discovery to the command post, providing precise GPS coordinates and describing the surrounding terrain features. The water bottle's location helped narrow the search area significantly, but it also confirmed that Eleanor was now in some of the most challenging terrain within Pine Ridge's boundaries. The creek system she appeared to be following would lead her through a series of steep ravines and dense forest patches where visibility was limited even during daylight hours. The creek crossing where David found the water bottle also provided important clues about Eleanor's decision-making process and physical condition. The fact that she had continued following the stream rather than attempting to climb back toward higher ground suggested either that she was following a deliberate strategy or that she was becoming increasingly disoriented by fatigue and stress. The water bottle's condition indicated that Eleanor was still thinking clearly enough to maintain her hydration, which was an encouraging sign for her overall survival prospects. David's next radio communication reached Tom Bradley at the ranger station, where Sarah Mitchell had been waiting for updates with growing anxiety. The discovery of Eleanor's water bottle represented the first concrete progress in the search effort for several hours, but it also meant that Eleanor was continuing to move farther from the main trail system and deeper into terrain that would be difficult to search comprehensively before dawn. "We've got another piece of evidence," David reported to the command post. Water bottle located at grid reference 77 Alpha, near the seasonal creek that runs through the lower section of Pine Valley. Based on the location and the direction of travel, I believe our subject is following the water source downstream. I'm going to continue tracking the creek bed, but I want additional teams positioned at the major convergence points where other streams feed into this system. Tom Bradley relayed David's findings to Sarah, explaining that the discovery was encouraging because it suggested Eleanor was making rational decisions about navigation and resource management. However, he also had to communicate the concerning reality that Eleanor's apparent route was taking her into increasingly remote areas where search operations would become progressively more difficult. Sarah listened to the update with the focused attention she normally reserved for critical business presentations, asking detailed questions about the terrain, weather projections, and resource allocation strategies. Her corporate background had taught her to identify key variables and potential bottlenecks in complex operations, skills that translated surprisingly well to understanding the logistical challenges of wilderness search and rescue efforts. "What does this David Chun need to continue the search effectively?" Sarah asked Tom, her executive instincts immediately seeking ways to provide additional support or resources. "Money isn't a concern. If there's equipment, personnel, or expertise that could help, I want it mobilized immediately." Tom appreciated her willingness to commit resources, but explained that the primary limitations were imposed by weather conditions and terrain, rather than funding or equipment availability. "David's got everything he needs in terms of gear and support," Tom assured her. "What we need now is time and favorable conditions for him to work through the search area systematically. He's the best tracker we've got, and he knows these mountains better than anyone. If your mother can be found, David will find her." The confidence in Tom's voice when discussing David Chun intrigued Sarah, who had built her career on identifying exceptional talent and understanding what motivated high-performance individuals. Something about the way multiple people spoke about this ranger suggested capabilities and experience that went beyond typical Forest Service training. Sarah found herself curious about the background and qualifications of the man who was currently responsible for her mother's rescue. As the night stretched on and radio updates became less frequent due to communication challenges in the remote search area, Sarah experienced a profound shift in her usual relationship with control and planning. For the first time in years, she was completely dependent on other people's expertise and decision-making. The success of the search effort rested entirely on the skills and judgment of strangers working in conditions that Sarah couldn't even properly visualize, much less influence through her typical management strategies. The forced helplessness created space for thoughts and emotions that Sarah's busy professional schedule normally kept buried. She began remembering aspects of her relationship with Eleanor that she had unconsciously minimized or dismissed. Her mother's genuine interest in Sarah's work, despite not understanding the technical details. Eleanor's pride in her daughter's achievements, even when she worried about the personal costs of Sarah's demanding career. The way Eleanor consistently reached out to maintain connection, even when Sarah's responses were brief and distracted by other priorities. At 3:15 in the morning, David's radio transmission broke through the static with an urgency that immediately caught everyone's attention at the command post. His voice was steady but strained, carrying the weight of someone who had just made a critical discovery after hours of methodical searching through treacherous terrain. "Command, this is Chun. I've located our subject. Eleanor Mitchell is alive and conscious, but she's injured and hypothermic. I need immediate medical evacuation to my current position." The coordinates David provided placed him nearly 4 miles from the nearest vehicle access point, in a ravine system that would require specialized rescue equipment and trained personnel to navigate safely. Tom Bradley's response was immediate and professional, but Sarah could hear the relief underlying his efficient coordination of the rescue operation. Medical personnel were already on standby. Helicopter evacuation had been arranged pending weather clearance, and specialized rescue teams were mobilizing to assist with the evacuation from David's remote location. David had found Eleanor huddled beneath a natural rock overhang that provided minimal protection from the wind and rain. She had fashioned a makeshift shelter using her jacket and some fallen branches, demonstrating the kind of practical resourcefulness that had probably saved her life during the long, cold night. Her left ankle was severely swollen from what appeared to be a significant sprain sustained during a fall earlier in the evening, and she was showing clear signs of hypothermia despite her efforts to stay warm and dry. "I'm okay, just cold and embarrassed," Eleanor managed to tell David as he began administering first aid and sharing his emergency shelter to help stabilize her body temperature. Her voice was weak but alert, and she maintained the good humor that seemed to be an integral part of her personality even under these challenging circumstances. "I suppose this wasn't my smartest adventure, was it?" David worked quickly to assess Eleanor's condition and provide immediate care while maintaining radio contact with the evacuation team. His wilderness medicine training, combined with his years of experience dealing with emergencies in remote locations, allowed him to stabilize Eleanor's situation while coordinating the complex logistics required to extract her safely from the ravine. The helicopter evacuation had to wait until dawn due to the storm conditions and the challenging terrain around David's location. Instead, a ground-based rescue team equipped with specialized litter equipment began the difficult process of reaching Eleanor's position and preparing her for evacuation on foot. The operation would require several hours and multiple personnel, but it was the safest option given the weather and terrain constraints. During the long wait for the rescue team to reach their location, David and Eleanor had their first real conversation. Eleanor was curious about David's background, his experience with wilderness emergencies, and his obvious competence in handling the complex challenges of a rescue. David found himself opening up about his work and his knowledge of the Pine Ridge ecosystem in ways that he hadn't done with anyone since moving to Cascade Valley. "You're not just a typical forest ranger, are you?" Eleanor observed with the perceptive directness that seemed to characterize her approach to most situations. "You move through this terrain like someone who spent serious time in wild places, and you handle emergency situations with the kind of confidence that comes from extensive experience." David's response was honest but brief, acknowledging his background in wildlife research without elaborating on the personal circumstances that had led him to his current position. Eleanor seemed to understand that there were complicated stories behind his career transition, and she respected his privacy while expressing genuine appreciation for his expertise and dedication to finding her. As the rescue team finally reached their location and began the careful process of preparing Eleanor for evacuation, David experienced a profound sense of completion that went beyond the successful conclusion of a difficult search operation. The night had forced him to confront capabilities and leadership qualities that he had deliberately suppressed since Maria's death. He had made critical decisions under pressure, coordinated complex rescue operations, and successfully located someone whose life depended on his expertise and persistence. The evacuation itself became a carefully orchestrated operation, involving multiple teams working in coordination to transport Eleanor safely through terrain that was challenging enough for experienced hikers under ideal conditions. David remained with Eleanor throughout the evacuation, monitoring her condition and providing medical support while the rescue team navigated the difficult route back toward vehicle access. By the time the evacuation team reached the ranger station, dawn was breaking over the Cascade Mountains, and the storm that had complicated the search effort was finally beginning to clear. Sarah's first glimpse of her mother being carried on a rescue litter, alert and talking despite her ordeal, released emotions that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge during the long night of waiting and uncertainty. Eleanor's reunion with Sarah was complicated by the mix of relief, worry, and unspoken tensions that had characterized their relationship for years. Sarah's first words were a combination of gratitude for her mother's safety and gentle scolding about the risks of hiking alone in challenging terrain. Eleanor's response was typically direct and unapologetic, acknowledging the poor judgment involved in her solo adventure while maintaining her fundamental belief in the importance of embracing life's experiences. "I know you think I'm reckless," Eleanor told Sarah as they waited for the ambulance that would transport her to Cedar Creek Medical Clinic for complete evaluation and treatment. "But I'd rather live fully and occasionally make mistakes than spend my life avoiding every possible risk. Though I suppose I'll be more careful about checking weather forecasts in the future." David's presence during this family reunion created an interesting dynamic that neither Sarah nor Eleanor had anticipated. Eleanor was obviously grateful for David's role in her rescue, but she was also clearly intrigued by the quiet competence and understated expertise he had demonstrated throughout the emergency. Sarah found herself studying this ranger who had spent all night searching for her mother with the same analytical attention she normally reserved for evaluating potential business partners or key employees. The medical evaluation at Cedar Creek revealed that Eleanor's injuries were significant but not life-threatening. Her sprained ankle would require several weeks of rest and rehabilitation, and her exposure to cold and wet conditions had pushed her dangerously close to serious hypothermia. But there were no lasting effects from her night in the wilderness. Dr. Rebecca Foster, the clinic's primary physician, emphasized how fortunate Eleanor had been that David found her when he did, as another few hours of exposure could have resulted in much more serious consequences. During Eleanor's treatment and evaluation, Sarah found herself in extended conversation with David for the first time. What began as expressions of gratitude for his professional expertise gradually evolved into a more substantive discussion about their respective backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives on life in the Pacific Northwest. Sarah learned that David's background was far more complex and impressive than his current position as a forest ranger would suggest. His previous work with National Geographic had taken him to remote locations around the world, documenting wildlife behavior and conducting research that contributed to important conservation efforts. His decision to leave that career for the relative stability and anonymity of Forest Service work had been motivated by personal tragedy and his responsibilities as a single father. David, in turn, was intrigued by Sarah's description of her work developing technology solutions for environmental challenges. Her company's focus on sustainable energy and conservation applications represented exactly the kind of practical application of scientific knowledge that David valued. Even though it operated in the corporate world rather than the wilderness settings where he felt most comfortable, the conversation revealed unexpected connections between their professional interests and personal values. Both had chosen career paths that allowed them to contribute to environmental protection and public safety, though they operated in very different spheres and used different approaches to achieve similar goals. Both had been shaped by significant personal losses that had influenced their life choices and priorities in profound ways. As Eleanor's treatment concluded and arrangements were made for her transportation back to her home in Cascade Valley, Sarah found herself reluctant to simply return to her normal routine in Portland. The events of the past 18 hours had disrupted her carefully structured existence in ways that felt both unsettling and oddly liberating. The realization that her mother could have died alone in the wilderness, combined with her recognition of how much distance she had allowed to develop in their relationship, created a sense of urgency about addressing priorities that she had been avoiding for years. "I'm going to stay in Cascade Valley for a few days to make sure Mom is settled properly," Sarah told her assistant Lisa during a phone call that rescheduled multiple meetings and conference calls. "I know this disrupts our schedule, but some things are more important than quarterly projections and strategic planning sessions." Eleanor's recovery period provided an opportunity for Sarah and David to continue the conversations that had begun during the emergency. Sarah found herself visiting Pine Ridge regularly, ostensibly to check on her mother's progress, but increasingly drawn to discussions with David about conservation challenges, sustainable technology applications, and the intersection between corporate innovation and environmental protection. David discovered that Sarah's professional expertise could provide valuable insights into technology solutions that might enhance the Forest Service's conservation and public safety efforts. Her understanding of software development, data analytics, and systems integration offered perspectives that complemented his field experience and scientific background in unexpected ways. 3 months after Eleanor's rescue, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her professional dedication and urban lifestyle preferences. She announced that Mitchell Tech Solutions would be opening a satellite office in Cascade Valley, focusing specifically on developing technology applications for wilderness management, conservation efforts, and emergency response systems. Decision allowed Sarah to maintain her leadership role in the company while spending significantly more time in the mountain community where her mother lived. It also created opportunities for ongoing collaboration with David and the Pine Ridge Forest Service on projects that combined Sarah's technical expertise with David's field experience and environmental knowledge. Eleanor's reaction to these developments was characteristically direct and perceptive. "It took getting lost in the woods for you to figure out what's really important," she observed during one of their weekly dinners together. "Though I'm not sure which discovery was more significant for you, finding out that I'm tougher than you thought, or meeting someone who shares your values but approaches life differently than you do." David's response to Sarah's increased presence in Cascade Valley was cautiously positive. His experience with Maria's death had made him careful about emotional attachments, especially relationships that might create complications for his daughter Emma. However, Sarah's genuine interest in conservation work, her respect for his expertise, and her obvious commitment to building a more authentic relationship with her mother suggested that she was serious about the life changes she was making. The collaboration between Sarah's technology company and the Pine Ridge Forest Service produced several innovative projects that attracted attention from conservation organizations and government agencies throughout the Pacific Northwest. Their work on predictive weather monitoring systems, GPS-based emergency communication networks, And wildlife tracking applications demonstrated how corporate innovation could address real-world environmental challenges when guided by practical field experience. 1 year after Eleanor's rescue, Pine Ridge hosted a community celebration recognizing the successful collaboration between Mitchell Tech Solutions and the Forest Service. The event highlighted not only the technological innovations that had emerged from their partnership, but also the broader community benefits that resulted when people with different expertise and perspectives worked together toward common goals. Sarah's speech at the celebration acknowledged how profoundly the events of that stormy night had changed her understanding of success, community, and personal priorities. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal what really matters, she told the assembled crowd. My mother's adventure in these woods led to discoveries that none of us could have anticipated. It brought together people who might never have met, created partnerships that are making real differences in conservation efforts, and reminded all of us that the most important connections in life often happen when we're willing to step outside our comfort zones. David's response was characteristically understated, but his words carried weight with everyone who knew his background and the personal journey that had brought him to Pine Ridge. This forest has always been a place where people can find what they're looking for, even when they're not sure what that is, he observed. Sometimes rescue operations save more than one person, and sometimes getting lost is the first step toward finding your way home. Eleanor, fully recovered from her wilderness adventure and now serving as an unofficial ambassador for Pine Ridge's hiking programs, had the final word at the celebration. The best adventures, she declared with the smile that had charmed everyone who met her, are the ones that change not just where you end up, but who you become along the way. Though next time I go hiking, I'm definitely checking the weather forecast first. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.